Fitness and Rehab India YouTube channel, Dr. Rupesh Peak Health Studio, Chennai, Dr. Arunachalam's Sairam Academy, Chennai, Sri Samraj Health Services Private Limited, Dindivanam. Today's topic is physiotherapy management in cranial nerves in different neurological and neurosurgical conditions will be presented by Dr. Annie Thomas, PhD in physiotherapy, professor and head of the Department of Physiotherapy, St. John's Medical College, St. John's National Academy of Health Sciences, Bangalore. I welcome volunteer Smriti Patki from Maharashtra. Also, I welcome EXRXindia.org team members, Dr. Rupesh and Professor Duna. I welcome Dr. Annie Thomas and request her to start the session. Madam, please start the session, madam.
Thank you, Chandramohan, for a brief introduction. Thanks a lot. And thanking you especially for giving me an opportunity to share my little knowledge with my like physiotherapy students, staff, whoever is joining with this. Nice to see you all. Even I cannot see your face, but participants, 65 participants is quite good and interested in the topic, especially on Sunday. That's also another good thing which I should really appreciate, that eagerness to get the knowledge. So, if I start the topic is cranial nerve assessment and management, which you might have studied in one sheet with all the pictures. What is the nerve numbers and what is the assessment? This is what all of you might have gone through. Even when I was in UG, I did the same thing. But when we started seeing the patients, we found there are a lot of things in that. It is not like only the assessment part. We have to something to deal with the assessment in each and every specific conditions, which is different from individual to individual, even in the adult conditions. So if you see when I'm saying about the cranial nerve assessment and management, I'm speaking only about the adult part. I'm not dealing with the pediatric. As you all know, the pediatric cranial nerve assessment and management is totally different, which we have to take care separately. So as you all know, this is the picture you might have seen in many PPTs, your class, books, everything. So as the thing, and this picture exactly shows actually where is the supply of each particular nerves. So starting from the olfactory till the hypoglossal, you can see how beautifully they have given this cartoon diagram. And actually it is good to remember if you see this picture as such. So you all must be remembering these numbers. You must have by hearted in your college study time and all. But if you see the part where it originates, you can see first two is coming from the part of the cerebrum, not it's from the brainstem as such. The brainstem actually starts from the oculomotor and goes up to hypoglossal. And even when you say brainstem, sometimes the vagus, and if you see the spinal accessory nerve, it takes a branch from the spinal aspect also. So it is, when we say cranial nerves, it is not completely from the brainstem. That's the first concept we all should have. It is a part of the cerebrum, it is a part of the spinal cord, and it is a part of the brainstem. So these all three involvement is there in cranial nerves. That's the first and foremost thing which I wanted to tell you all. So this is the placement of the cranial nerves. If you see first olfactory nerve. If you see, it is a telencephalon. That is the downward part of the cerebral hemispheres. As such, you know, the cerebrum has got gray matters, which we say about the neurons. Down you have white matter, which we say as axons. And when you come down, you can see the telencephalon area. There is the olfactory just above the brainstem. And same thing about the optic nerve also. It is also diencephalon just posterior to that. These two are coming from the part of cerebrum as such. So that's why in cerebrum, two aspects, telencephalon and diencephalon. So when you see about the oculomotor, it is oculomotor and trochlear nerve. Usually when we study also, you all must be knowing, we study these three nerves together. Which one? Oculomotor, trochlear and abducent. So but if you see oculomotor and trochlear, it is coming from the midbrain. But even though in midbrain, oculomotor will be a part of anterior region and trochlear is a part of dorsal region. Abducent, if you see, it is coming at the pons, that is the mid part, and at the pons and medullary junction. So it is not completely in the pons. The trigeminal is the one especially seen in the pons area. Pons and medulla junction, if you see, there is a thing called as fourth ventricle. The CSF fluid is collected in that area. So abducent nerve is placed there. So that is why if any increased intracranial pressure, the abducent nerve and the facial nerve oftenly get into trouble. So if in the sense, if there is a midline shift or if there is a bleeding into the brain or because of traumatic brain injury or any other issues, the fluid collection in the brain becomes more. The fluid collection in the brain has got placement in the fourth floor of fourth ventricle. It has got lateral ventricle. It can be in the third ventricle. But if the fluid collection is more in the fourth floor, these two nerves are under risk, that is abducens and facial nerve. So these both are under the pons and medullary junction. And another one thing is acoustic. We can say other word vestibulocochlear nerve, which is the other name for that. It is also seen at the pons and medullary junction, that is cerebellopontine angle. If you see facial nerve and vestibulocochlear nerve, you can see there is 2 points, that is cerebellopontine angle. Cerebellopontine angle has got a peculiarity because the cerebellar lesions or the cerebellar tumors and the pontine tumors can again affect the facial and the vestibulocochlear nerve. So we have different problems. Abducen and facial involvement can be seen. Facial and acoustic involvement also can be seen. Glossopharyngeal and vagal, if you see, it is in the medulla. That is why you can see any problem in that medullary region. You can see the vagal stimulation happens or the vagal tone is decreased and the patient has got multiple issues in the respiratory system and the cardiorespiratory system. So glossopharyngeal and vagus is in the medullary region. Spinal accessory has got spinal accessory roots as well as the cranial roots. So it is having a place in the medulla as well as it has got a spinal nerve roots coming. So that is why it is called a spinal accessory nerve, even though it is a cranial nerve, because it has got a components from the spinal nervous system. Hypoglossal is again placed in the medulla. So this read what I meant. You all must have learned for your exams, and those are going to write exams also. This will be in your mind. See what happens when we say the nerves. The nerve has got two functions. The cranial nerve has got two functions. One is sensory function, and another one is motor functions. So when you say 1 to 12 nerves, each one has got a sensory function and motor function. So if you see the sensory function alone, you can see olfactory has got only sensory functions. If you see vestibular cochlear, it has got only sensory functions. But when you see optic nerve, again it has got sensory functions. So like this it is there. But motor and sensory are also there for some kind of nerves. If you see the motor part, oculomotor, trochlear, again abducent, and you can see spinal accessory and hypoglossal. These all are purely motor. So some nerves are purely sensory, some are purely motor. When and some nerves that like trigeminal, glossopharyngeal and vagal, if you see, and facial nerve, these all nerves have got efferent and afferent. That means it has got a efferent, that is sensory, and efferent, that is motor. It has got both functions. So there, wherever it has got both functions, thereby it is termed as B. So that's why SSMM you can see, but means B means sensory and motor. So again, facial has got the same thing, vagal has got the same thing, glossopharyngeal also has got the same thing. So if you know, if you again see the functions of the each nerves, olfactory, as all of you all know, it sensitizes the smell. Optic, again, it has got different functions. I will list out when I tell about the assessment, especially visual acuity. It has got pupillary reflex and it has got visual field. It has got fundus and optic. All these features comes in the optic nervous system. If you see the oculomotor nervous system, it has got only the motor functions. So especially the eye muscles, the muscles which is supplying by trochlear is abducent will be different, but other muscles of the eye muscles are supplied by the oculomotor system. And it has got a pupillary reflex. Pupillary reflex, when I say, it has got two things. One is optic and one is oculomotor. Optic means when you, as the flashlight, that is an afferent signal, and that will be taken away by the optic nerve, and it has to reflect back, that is oculomotor. So that it has got two functions in the pupillary reflex. Trochlear and abduction, again, it has got the same function, that is the oculomotor muscles. But in trigeminal, if you see, it is the muscle which supplying the face sensory aspect is always supplied by the trigeminal by its divisions. So, and it has got a motor functions. That motor function is basically about the masseter muscles, temporalis muscles. That means the muscles of mastication, we say, that is taken care by the trigeminal muscles. And you have got jaw reflex also, you can see. Then you can see facial. Facial has got different functions. Facial has got sensory functions, that is about the taste and sensations, and facial movements, that is by the movement of the muscles. So this all aspect is taken care by the facial. When you say vestibular cochlea, it has got two things. One is hearing, one is balance. Hearing is basically by the cochlear region, and balance is taken care by the vestibular functions. Glossopharyngeal, actually the movement of the pharynx, the sensation of the pharynx, and the taste, that is the posterior part of the tongue, all these things will be taken care by the glossopharyngeal. That means the palate movements, the pharynx movements, everything is taken care by the glossopharyngeal nerve. But at the same time, it has got the taste sensation, so it has got a sensory function also. When you say vagal, it is the biggest nerve, and it has got many functions. That means it has got sympathetic functions too. So it has got a movement and functions by the motor way. That means the palate movement, the pharynx. So glossopharyngeal and vagal always go hand in hand. When you check the glossopharyngeal and vagal, if you see, it will always, we have to check it together. And the gag reflex also is taken care by the vagal nerve, and other functions of the swallowing, everything will be the or esophagus movements, the swallowing movements of the from the mouth to the uvula, and other things will be taken care by the vagal nerve. If you see the spinal accessory, as you all know, two muscles of the neck, that is your trapezius muscle and sternocleidomastoid, that is the two muscles which is supplied by a cranial nerve, that is your spinal accessory. As I said, spinal accessory has got a components from the spinal root, that is why it is termed as spinal accessory nerve. Hypoglossal, as you shall know, it supplies the tongue, and whatever the protrusion or the tongue movements is basically taken care by the hypoglossal. So this is the general functions of the cranial nerves. So let's see one by one, that will be better. So what are the main causes? This is the main glimpse of whatever is the reason for the olfactory nerve to lead into further problems. So the main reason is common cold. As you all know, when you get a cold, you will not be able to smell. Even that is the reason why you may not be able to taste the food also, because that smell is not coming. So that is the usual, and it recovers after the cold. But the fractures of cribriform plate or the ethmoid bone is usually happen after a trauma or head injury, or it can be a direct some other cause, a direct punch, which can create a cribriform plate fracture, resulting in the olfactory nerve to get affected. So that is at the peripheral level. So that is again a peripheral level of lesion, it can recover. When you see the other thing which is called as frontal lobe tumors, so it is why, because frontal lobe tumors, it has become a central nervous system issue, where when the I said already the origin is from the cerebrum, and it is going to give the superior nerve supply, that means from the nucleus to the superior supply to the frontal lobe. So if the tumors are there, then also the frontal tumors also has a result of patients not feeling the smell. So that lesions is termed as parosmia or anosmia. Pyrosmia is altered sense of smells. That is means everything they cannot sensitize. There is a lesion in the spelling like a normal person, but still the patient may be able to aware or may be able to sensitize the cells. It's an altered sense. It's an impaired one. Once you say anosmia, there is the smell itself is totally absent. That means the patient is not able to sensitize any smell. That is anosmia. So these two things are common in olfactory nerve lesions. So what when we do the assessment, first and foremost, we have to whatever we do for the patients, it is through our hands. Even though we put the gloves and everything, sometimes we may not be able to put the need not to be used gloves, but we have to wash the hands, and we should not give infection to the patient. That's the first and foremost thing we have to be taken care. At least COVID made us to make more hygienic and more washing of hands. But literally speaking, for any cranial nerve assessment, the first olfactory I have explained, but I have not repeated in everything. But whenever you are near to the patients, even for the eye checking, visual acuity, you have to wash your hands. And first and foremost thing, just don't go near to the patients and start physio. The patient may be seeing a doctor, the patient will be seeing a nurse, the patient will be seeing other people, helpers. So introduce yourself, who are you and what is your thing. And before taking out the patient or before going for checking, check the patient's details. So for example, if the patient had a head trauma, or if the patient had some issues, and if the patient is already agitated and not responding, when you look at the patient you feel normal, without looking what was the cause, you may not be able to get the result what you want. Sometimes the patient may not respond to you. So sometimes the sensitization or the stimuli what you're going to give has to be changed. So that is why the patient's details, that means when you check a patient name and IP or OP number is important. See, some patient's name will be same. Suppose Velusamy is a name for many, maybe 5 people who are admitted in the ward or the thing, or the person you are oftenly sick. So we have to check the patient's name with their identification number and check what is the problem. If the patient is having a right frontal tumor and you are going to assess the patient, where will you assess? What you are going to expect? Or if the patient is having a trauma, the both nostrils may show the same result. So it depends upon the patient's condition and details. It is important that how you are going to assess each patients, it will be differing. If the patient is having any uncomfortable pain or irritation, they will not cooperate with your assessment, and you will write there is absence of smell, may be wrong in your diagnosis. So see to that patient is comfortable. Is it the appropriate time for you to evaluate that patient? That is more important thing for a physio. Every assessment cannot be done for every patient as you have time for that patient. It is like the patient time also we have to see during the assessment. Maybe your assessment has to break down into many sessions. Maybe the first day you may not get an accurate result. Second day you may get an accurate result. So your sessions may do 3 times repetitions at least for a patient to assess. So when I say about a neurological aspect of the patients, at least the assessment require 3 days. Why I say means the first day when you do the assessment what you got, it has to see on the second day and see whether it was right or not. You have to compare it. Sometimes the patients, because of the medication or the sedation or the irritation or the agitated, whatever it is, you will not get an appropriate result. So it is very important for the students or the staff, those are going to deal with the patient in the ward or normally in your OPD area, wherever it is. That is very important. Whether they are uncomfortable, if they are depressed also, they will not cooperate you. If they are not attentive also, they will not cooperate you. So these things has to be taken into consider. That's why we say patient details is important. And before going to the patient, or before you know that what are the things to be checked, keep the stimulation things with your hand. Okay, don't run around for each and everything. Sometimes some patients we cannot give the odor or the smell which is unknown for them. So we have to, even though we say some points, some names of the thing, Sometimes it may not be applicable for some patients. So that also we have to think of. Suppose for example, if you're going to treat a 21-year-old man who never gone into the kitchen, and if you're going to give cinnamon cloves and all, they will not identify. Maybe toothpaste is the ideal thing for them, coffee powder will be ideal. So situation and patient's details is important for that. And stimuli should be kept near to the testing area and should not run. And patient should not see that testing things. It should be kept in a cover and close it. Whenever you go to the patients, you can carry these things, that is the cinnamon, coffee powder, cloves, toothpaste, whatever it is. If you don't have, you have an alcohol smelling sanitizer or something which smells too much, that also you can keep it in a tissue pad and you can smell them. That is also, the patient can identify 10 meters away, that's what they're saying, the alcohol smell can feel it. So at least if you are near to the patient, I think that smell will be sufficient. Always try to do the assessment in sitting or lying down position. When you check olfactory, usually the patient will be in lying down position. I don't think any patient who comes to the ward will you will be going and checking olfactory sensation. Usually in the IP sections, either in the ICU or the ward, usually you go for olfactory testing. Always, if the patient is alert, the patient understood, you say that I'm just checking something for you, just close your eyes, nothing will happen. You make him comfortable, then ask the patient to close the eyes and keep the stimuli near the nostril. When you do a checking, the other nostril should first you keep it closed, then only take the stimuli to the other nostril area, and you should repeat for the both nostril and see that what is the response of the patient. Usually, what is our interpretation says that if the patient can smell or identify both nostrils, indicate olfactory nerve is intact. Usually, patient will not have unilateral loss. Sometimes, if the patient had a trauma, that's what I said, a cribriform plate fracture or ethmoid region effusion, something, or if there is a tumor, or if the patient is having a generalized meningitis, the sometimes you feel only the smell sensation in one thing. That doesn't mean that the patient smell is affected or the sensation is affected. So unilateral loss is usually a recoverable one, and it is not maybe a very problematic issue. But if both the nostrils, if the patient is not able to smell, then definitely the olfactory nerve might have injured. So this is generally about the olfactory nerve. Next, when if I go for optic nerve, this optic, oculomotor, facial nerve, these are the nerves which is very much more important, and we see more oftenly getting involved in many conditions. So usually what happens, you must have seen all these names, that is blindness and pupillary abnormalities. You must have heard of Marcus Gunn pupil, scotomata, quadrant or a hemianopsis, hemianopsis with macula sparing. These all are the areas where it involved, depends upon, and the person who found out that have put up these names. So when you say Marcus Gunn pupil, it is the retinal or the optic nerve disease. It's an optic nerve disease. If you see scotomata and quadrant or hemianopsis, it is the optic tract and radiation, optic from the optic tract, it is radiating to your cerebral cortex. So that is getting affected. Or you can see if the patient's having again hemianopsis with macular sparing, again you can see the cortex area is affected. The picture indicates how the optic nerve goes. So as you all know, you have got a nasal half and you have got a temporal half. Yes. So whatever coming from the nasal and this thing, so whatever we seeing near the nasal region, so it is taken care by the other side. So the fibers goes to the, actually nasal goes to the temporal side, and that's why it indicates the orange color. So that comes, and you can see usually what happens, the nasal halves, so that means the opposite side. So if it is my right side lateral, okay, and my left side medial part, these things will come and join and cross to the other side. So that is how it is put as blue color and orange color. So when there is a lesion comes, we have to sensitize whether the optic nerve, where they indicated no optic nerve, if there is a lesion over that area, what is going to happen. Okay, so if you have basically if you have an optic nerve, you know the orange and the blue color is there. So if it is affected, you can see the both that eye is going to blind. That means that eye vision is lost. That is what it indicates. But if you come little behind, you can see optic tract. Optic tract, what it indicates? So what optic tract? It has got the fibers which is coming from the one eye and from the other eye. Both eyes fibers are coming. So both sides, one side temporal region and one side temporal nasal region fibers are coming to the other side. So when there is a lesion over there, the patient will not be able to see the temporal half and the nasal half. That is why optic nerve tract become a issue. You have seen a place called as optic chiasma. That is again the fibers which is crossing from the both eyes. Again, chiasma, if you see that where is a lesion, one part and the other, again eyes are getting involved. So that is also optic chiasma. Also, if you see two eyes are involved. Only in the case of optic nerve, one nerve or the complete eye is involved. But other than that, if you see the optic chiasma or optic tract, or when you come to the when you see these two things, you can see both the eyes are involved. So it is very important. When you come to the genicular calcarean tract, again you can see both eyes are involved. Either it is affected on right side, either it is affected on left side, whatever it is, both eyes, one of the side will be getting affected. Moreover, if you see the cortex area, visual cortex area, that is in the occipital lobe, that is the area where the sensitization of whatever you are seeing. So if I see my laptop, that I feel it is as a laptop because it is engrammed in my brain and I can understand it is a laptop. My previous thing, if the laptop was new to me, then I may have to learn this is a laptop. If it is already learned, that means my cortex area is already seen laptops at many times, so it is engrammed, so I don't need to ask anyone. It is already there in my brain. So when the vision comes from the periphery, it is already in the cortex, it is sensitized as laptops. That is the cortex region. So if any lesion happens in that area, that also is different, depends upon the right side nerves system or the left side. If it is total, the patient will go for cortical blindness. So that this diagram has to be kept in your mind always. You can take the paper and then once you redo 2 3 times, it will be automatically in your brain. Don't worry about it. So what happens in our system, that means especially the neuro system, there are many conditions which can cause optic nerve to be get damaged. So one is adenomas, pituitary adenoma. You know, pituitary is just above that. So if it compresses the optic chiasma region of so what happens, the patient will have problem. So again, if there is an increased intracranial pressure, increased intracranial pressure always compresses the nerves, because it's again I said it is in diencephalon and it will compresses the optic nerve. Okay, the ventricular pressure will be more and it can compress the optic nerve and the patient will have total loss of vision. So that is again a problem. So any brain hematoma or accumulation of CSF fluid result in optic nerve damage. So that is also important. When you see, I see, if I say division wise, first one I said already in that picture, a lesion of one optic nerve causes a total loss of vision in that same eye. That's why I said before coming to the optic chiasma or going into the tract, if the nerve of the one eye get damaged because of trauma or head injury or any direct lesions or the disease, the patient will lose complete blindness of one eye. That is very important. But in the case of pituitary adenoma, it is compressing the lesion. The lesion happens at the optic chiasma because the tumor compresses the optic chiasma. This will what happens, the patient will have both eyes involvement. That means I said the temporal half plus nasal half will be involved. So the visual field is going to get affected and patient will get bitemporal hemianopsia. So that is why it is more important. When you see the lesion is at the tract level or the radiation, that means from after the tract it is going to project into the cortex region. That is why it is called as radiation. So before that lateral geniculate nucleus, if anything happens, you can see the patient will not see able to see the one half, that is left hemifield or the right. If it is left hemifield, you can see contralateral homonymous hemianopsia. So this picture again indicates, that's why this picture again I put it, so that when you see, you can understand what it is. If the lesion is at the both visual cortex, that's what I said, the visual cortex is at the occipital lobe. If the lesion happens at the visual cortex, then the patient will go for complete blindness. So that is the problem where we cannot do anything for the patient, because the cortical blindness is the one which we cannot help the patient to do any surgeries or whatever it is, because the issue is happened at the cortex level itself. If there is at the periphery level something they can do, but the cortex levels, they cannot, whatever you see, the periphery will be good, but the place where we have to sensitize what is the object, if there is a problem, then how can we recognize the objects? So it is very important. So depends upon the level of lesions, we can say what is the areas of the eyes is affected, whether is the one eye is affected, or the temporal half is affected, or the nasal half is affected. Like that we can say where is the lesion and what is the problem in the patient. So this is the picture exact problem. If you see 7, you can see this the lesion where they put right line, that is for the right side, that is due to the lesion of right, that means it is crossing over, right? So the left is controlled by right, as you study in the corticospinal. Same thing happens because optic chiasma, it crossed and it came. So if this occipital one lobe is affected, that means the right side lobe is affected, that means left side cortical blindness will be there. So sometimes the cortical blindness will be bilateral if the visual cortex of both sides is affected. If it is only one side is affected, suppose if there is a stroke or something at the posterior cerebral artery is involved, or if there is a clotting happen, then maybe only one side of the lobe will be affected and only one side cortical blindness will be there. So that is also thing. See, why we are knowing about all these things means when we treat the patient, we have to sensitize, we have to do what kind of rehabilitation we give. If we give any exercise protocols, or if we try to stand and do something exercises by giving instructions, or if you give a visual any input to the patient, if the field is affected, the patient cannot cope up with your rehab program, whatever you do it. So the patient's associated issues has to be checked whenever we treat any patients. So that's why we check the cranial this detail for any kind of conditions, even in the stroke or trauma or any optic nerve injuries. What are the things you will check in the optic nerve? I said initially visual acuity, visual field, visual color, fundoscopy or fundus and disc. We can say light reflex, or other terms is pupillary reflex. When you see the visual acuity, you all might be knowing. So we cannot carry over one Snellen chart and go everywhere to see that whether the patient is having 20/20 vision. Yes or no? It is not possible. Sometimes the patient will be the ward, we have to check the visual acuity. What we will do, we can do in a sitting down position or the stand. The patient, if the patient is lying down, how far we should see what is the vision, whether the patient's head is propped up, he is able to see you. Then you have to check and see, or show the objects and see how far he is able to see. That is what we are checking in the far field or the near field. Far field and near field, as such, a technical way to do is you have to do a Snellen chart or you have to do a Jagger chart. That is different. But for the patient, when we treat an IP patient, we can use this techniques. How you should do means, if the patient is using a eyeglasses in the sense, if you are in the ward area or in the optometric area, they will give a glass to occlude the one eye. That means they'll put a glass which you cannot see through, or you put a pinhole kind of thing. That means the patient can assess one eye at a time. We can assess only one at a time. That is the reason for it. So if the patient is having a corrected glass, then use the corrected glass and check the clarity of the vision. Usually we'll do in sitting position. we should stand 6 meter away. That is what we say, no, 6 by 6 distance. So 6 meter away from the patient's bed and ask the patient to close one eye while opening the other. That is what we should do. And you should see, asking the patients, what we can do is we can ask the patient to count your fingers. So if the patient is able to count it, it's well and good. If the patient is not able to count, you go little more closer. So as you go near, how far the patient is able to see you and count and do it, that indicates that the patient's visibility. So when you do the exercise protocols or when you do give the treatment, you see to that your visual acuity of the patient is only this much. Your rehab also should be within that period. We cannot consider all the patients are normal. Even the patients not only for neuro, even for ortho or cardiorespiratory, whatever it is. Actually, cranial nerve testing is important in the case of visual acuity. So we have to check the patients near, how far it is near to the patients. That is the distance we have to utilize for the treatment. If the patient's requirement for eyeglasses, then definitely the patient has to go for an ophthalmologist, has to check the correct glasses for him. So Snellen chart, this you all are aware. Many of us are using glasses, so we'll be aware of it. And you know, always we say the vision is 6 by 6, 20 by 20. So when we say that is, you know, how is the formula also? So D is the distance. Okay, D is the distance, means that is 6 meters away. So chart is placed 20 feet or 6 meters. So the from the patient to the chart, that distance is 6 meters. Okay, and D, the capital D is the distance from which he can read it clearly. Okay, so normally if the patient is able to able to see in 6 meters, then we can say the vision is 6 by 6. If the patient is not able to do 6 by 6, then the corrected glasses given, that means the corrected glasses is reducing the distance. So that's why the 6 by 6 becomes changed in myopia or hypermyopia conditions. So that 6 by 6 is depends upon the how far the distance from the Snellen chart to the patients and how far the patient is able to read it up. So that is about the Snellen chart. Usually we don't do, but when you get a visual acuity checkup from the patients, definitely you can go through that. What is the significance or what is the vision of the patient? Using the left hand means you should use the right hand. Okay, and see that the object which is coming from the visual area is coming near the midline, so they should cover up to the midline. So if the examiner is able to see that, the same thing should be used for the patient. If the examiner is not able to, if when the patient able examiner starts seeing, that is the correct thing for the patient also, so that you have to be careful. So the patient hand also will be same thing, and the patient and examiner should detect the finger at more or less the same time. That is the correct way of doing it. So this has to used for both. First you have to use the one eye, the other, after that you have to close the other eye, other side, and then again you have to use it. So right first or left first or right, that you can alternatively do it. But see to that you are also using the, suppose the patient is using the right hand to close the eyes, the examiner use the left hand to close his eyes. So that is the way we should do it. So this is good for the patient to find out the vision field. Okay, and this says that how much the patient is having a field vision. This indicates the temporal vision as well as the nasal vision for the patient. So if the patient is having, where is the field of vision, if the patient is getting affected, that means that we should not give any objects to that area to do any rehabilitation. So that is what is the thing indicating for a physio. So this is the thing which was using olden times, and some of them are using right now also, which is called as Goldman perimeter. That means the vision on the one circumference kind of things, that is 180 degrees, and 180 180 360 degrees. You can see the patient, how far the patient is able to field wise, how they do is, this is they does, we don't do use the, actually ophthalmologists will use this. This you all might have seen, that is Ishihara plate. This is to identify the colors. So the patient also can be identified by these colors. See, this is very important for us. We may think that this is not important, but it's very important. Why I tell you? Some patients must be having an issue, especially in the stroke or head injury patients will have vision field issues as well as color vision issues. The patient is in the ICU. If the patient is a neuro patient and his conscious level is decreased, usually when we do a management, we used to do light, but every time we cannot put the torchlight into the patient's eyes and see the tracking. We use the colored object to see the tracking. But if the patient is not able to identify the colors, then there is no point in you are doing tracking. So usually when we do the rehabilitation, first and foremost, what we used to do is, as you see in the childhood, the child used to see in 1 month, the child used to see black and white. You know, first 3 days, the child will see black and white color, not in colored things. So like that, when the patient get affected, we will do the same thing. We have to use the black and white color for the tracking. Later on we go for the color tracking. So this will facilitate the patient. Sometimes the patient may not be having a problem with the color issues, but we cannot identify at that point of time because the patient is already comatized. So these stages we can use different things, but if the patient is coming out of it and able to well identify things and all, we can definitely see the patient is having a color issues, color vision issues. For that we will use this plate. Another thing is fundae and optic disc. Since this is basically the patient who is having this, also we will not do the fundoscopy. You might have seen one torch-like thing. Usually they check the optic nerve. So to find out whether the people it is they are looking through the pupil of the eye to find out the optic nerve issues. That is the fundae and optic disc. Usually the patient is having a papilledema, or if the patient is hypertensive, this fundoscope is the best one to indicate that how far or how much, how many days or how long the patient is suffering from the condition. This can be literally we can make out. Pupillary reflex is one of the reflexes done, but you have to always keep it in mind. This is done by both nerves. As I said, optic and the oculomotor nerve. Optic nerve function is afferent signals. Oculomotor function is efferent. When you say optic nerve, you can see that picture light into the eye. You can see how that orangish thing goes. How you said, optic nerve, optic chiasma, geniculate nucleus goes to the optic radiation, goes to the cortex. So this is how it comes, and from there it has to be come out as a motor signal through the oculomotor nerve. That will be coming as green signal. So one eye, if you put it, you can see the other eye also, you can see the reflex mechanism. So which is the nucleus in the brain to identify this light reflex, that is the Edinger Westphal nucleus. So this has to action potential has to generated. It has to send the signals to the from the motor. It has to conduct the signals through the oculomotor nerve. It has come to the peripheral region. Then you can see the constriction of the muscles. So this uh, uh, pathway is called as pupillary reflex. So this is what happens. And as I said, control efferent is by optic and efferent is by oculomotor. So this indicates what happens. The ciliary muscle is the muscle which is present in the pupil. So these muscles will start constricting. This muscle is supplied by your oculomotor nerve. So that is why you can see dilatation and concentric. You can see the picture where it indicates direct and concentric. Direct means which eye you are going to put the torch, that is direct. And when you put the torch on the right eye, already left eye also will get a reflex mechanism, that is consensual reflex. This is what we have to check in the all the patients to see that, to find out where is a unilateral lesion or if there is a lesion at the both eyes. To see that, they will do this pupillary reflex. And when you do the testing, as you know, always when you do, you should put all the lights, and if you try to check the uh, eye pupillary reflex, you will not get it. You have to see that the lights are off, at least dim the light and put the hands on the to do like this, so that the direct light will not fall on patient. See, usually you will do this in the patient in the ICU or in the ward, to see that where there is a dilatation, or to see that the patients to stimulate or to facilitate some kind of things. You have to do this comma stimulation. You have to do this pupillary reflex mechanism. So using any light, which you can use your mobile or you can use the small torch, anything can be used for that. And you have to use into the one eye, and you have to remove it, and then you to do the other eye. When you do to the right eye and see that right side constriction, and once more you do it and see the constriction on the other side. Again, you should do on the left. If you're doing the right, then you do on the left side and see that pupillary reflex on the left eye plus concentric reflex on the right side. This both has to be seen and see the response of the thing. Always direct and consensual response should be equal for both, will not be changing. In normal people, it will be same. But we have to consider few things. If the patient's pupil are small, sometimes some people's pupil will be small. So if you see mine, it is dilated. So different people have different kind of pupils. So if it is small, then it is very difficult to see that how much the constriction has happened. So in that case, again, you may have to dim the light, or as I said, keep the hand above the eye level so that you will the direct light will not fall in the patient's eyes. So if you are still unable to appreciate the response, ask the patient to close their eyes if they are if they are able to obey your commands. Ask them to close the eyes and keep it tightly closed, then automatically open and put the or light the torch into the eyes. This is what we can make out. So what is the interpretation by doing this? Under normal conditions, you can see both pupils will appear symmetric. Asymmetry of the pupils is referred as what the name called, if you see right side constriction is more, dilatation is more, and the left side is not similar to that, that condition is called as anosocoria. If the afferent nerve is not working, neither people will respond when light is shined in the affected eye. That is one thing you have to keep in mind. The optic nerve of right is affected means I will not get the reaction on the right side. Okay. If the light is shined in the normal eye, okay, that means my left side is okay. However, it will cause the affected people to constrict. So my left side people also will constrict. If my left eye is normal, the right side also will constrict. Hope you understood. If my right eye is affected and if I put a light in, you will not get a constriction. But if I put a light on the left eye, I can see constriction on the left eye because the left eye was normal, and I can see the constriction on the right side because of the mechanism what we have seen of the crossing of the optic nerves, because the afferent nerve is not affected here. Here optic nerve is affected. That is why we are getting the response. The right eye optic nerve was damaged, so nobody was there to take the afferent signals. That is why I didn't get the reaction. But my oculomotor was good. So when I put the light on the left eye, the oculomotor worked as a consensual reflex mechanism, and I got the constriction of the right eye constriction. So that is more important. So hope you understood. This is referred as afferent pupil defect. When you don't get the direct reflex mechanism on one eye, that is called as afferent pupil defect. And if you're getting concession reflex, that also is important. Afferent is not getting, but efferent is coming. That is called as afferent pupil defect. If the efferent nerve is not working, the pupil will appear dilated at baseline and will have neither direct. If the efferent is not working means what? My oculomotor is not working, then how my muscles will work? My muscles will not get any signals. So the eyeball or the eye pupil will appear as always dilated. It will not show constriction. If you give directly into the eye also, you will not get it. If you put it on the other eye also, you will not get constriction on the eye, which is affected by the oculomotor nerve. Hope you understood. Optic nerve alone is affected, it is, you will get the constriction. If the oculomotor is affected, you will not get the constriction. Both direct and consensual, you will not get it. Why this is? So what is the reasons for these conditions? Basically, sometimes the medications or the intoxications can cause the sympathetic activation system. You know, all the nervous system has got a connection with the hypothalamus, which is meant for the sympathetic activations. So this will result in the dilatation of the both the pupils. So you will not get the constriction of the pupils. Sometimes drugs like narcotics, which can cause symmetric constriction of the pupils. That means both pupils look always constricted. So that is because of the drugs. The other one is eye drops, that is which is having a mitratic agents, which is used to paralyze the muscles. This will also make the eyes always dilated. You must have experienced when you gone for eye checking, they will use these things, and after checking you will not be able to see the things properly. You feel it's like a blurred thing. That is because they are dilating the pupil and keeping. Additionally, any process which cause increased intracranial pressure, so that is the central nervous system issues. If there is any intracranial pressure, again the pupil will be dilated and they will not respond to right. So these are the few reasons why you will not get. The other reason for which I have not mentioned here is brainstem lesion, or in the case of the patient is death happen. In that case also you will not get the constriction. So that is one of the criteria to find out there is a brain death. But there are other clinical features which is correlating with that. The pupillary reflex is not the one alone to say that brain death has happened. Third one is oculomotor. I think I have to rush in. Lesion is unable to look up, down, or medial. So you, as you know, except the you might have learned that formula, right? So for LR6. So other than these two muscles, the all other muscles are supplied by the oculomotor nerve. So if the patient is not able to look up, down, or medially, then you can say oculomotor nerve is damaged, and ptosis is one of the reason, one of the conditions. Then pupil dilatation, bilateral or ipsilateral, and loss of accommodation reflex. Pupil dilatation, I said already, it is applied to the ciliary muscles, so that's why it's said. Then another reflex is accommodation reflex. So this many reasons are there for the third cranial nerve. See, there are lot of things. One is infection. See, when I say nuclear portion, fascicular midbrain portion, that means where from the each nerve has got a nuclear, like your spinal nerve, it has got a nuclear area. Spinal nerve has got anterior horn cells or posterior horn cells. We say it is the nucleus. So anterior horn cells, once it comes out, it becomes a periphery part, but it has got an upper connection with your tracts. So the lesion can be at the neuronal level at the anterior horn cells, or at the peripheral level, or the tracts which is connected to the brain. Same thing for the cranial nerves also. Cranial nerves, from there where the midbrain it is originated, where it is supplying, that is your peripheral part. Nucleus means the where that originated. If it is connected to the other parts of the brain, that is through the tract system inside the brain itself. So if that is affected, then it becomes superior nuclear palsy. So that is why the areas are different, or the terms are different. Nuclear portion means where it is originated. That is, maybe the reason may be infection, or maybe due to the hemorrhage, or any tumors, or any brain abscess. This may be the reason for the. So you always imagine this oculomotor nerve is placed in the midbrain. So infection, hemorrhage, neoplasm, abscess in the midbrain region only will affect the nuclear of the oculomotor nerve. So that has to be taken care. If that happens, the recovery is very less chance, because you know the nucleus is affected, you know it will not regenerate, it will not come back. So patient may have loss in one eye. One eye muscles may not be supplied by this particular nerve because the nuclear is affected. You know, it is a pair, right side and left side. Fascicular midbrain portion, again, it is the where it is emerged out. So in there also the reason is same. Anything's near, because of this, anything happened to that particular nerve, again the nerve will not function properly. The next thing is fascicular subarachnoid portion. So that can be the multiple reasons. That means anything with the other part of the brain connection will result in an oculomotor palsy. That is in the case of aneurysm, or infectious meningitis, or if there is any carcinoma, or any ophthalmoplegic migraine. Even that is very dangerous in oculomotor nerve palsy. See, these are the other things. There are so many things actually: tumors, pituitary apoplexy, vascular, giant interval. These all things are intracranial issues which will compress or which will affect the oculomotor tracts. So the patient, what happens means the signals from the brain to the peripheral system. That means the optic nerve gives away the signals, but the signals from the brain to the eyes has to come through the oculomotor. So you can imagine any of this in that pathway or the connection center, if it is affected, then you will not be able to, that eye will not be able to visualize anything, or they will not able to perceive. We should say the word perceive, because anything with the cortical lesions or around that areas beyond the nucleus, if there is any lesion comes, that causes cortical blindness, where the patient cannot be rehabilitated or patient cannot be treated in that conditions, because it's a brain and the nerve get damaged. uh, the testing is this is very simple, everybody knows. Look up and down, medial, lateral, this all you know, plus sign. So by this we can make out. So in the picture you can see trochlear is written, so that is, you know, which is different thing. And you can see the other muscles, how it is, the eyeball moves up and down, that means the muscle is pulling the eyeball up and down. So the my eyeball is above the eyeball, you can see the muscle is like, you can see like a strings, it is connected on the right, left, top, bottom, like that. So that strings are the muscles. So that if my, if I'm looking towards the right side, means my medial rectus and lateral rectus of both eyes is moving, that means it's pulling towards that side. It is like how you do an elbow flexion, same way you are pulling it. So if any of these muscles are, if the oculomotor nerve palsy comes, these muscles cannot do like that. One will be on right side, the other will be on the left side. It cannot move because the left side must have been affected. So that is how we have to check it, all the movements, to find out which is the affected. So this I am going through because all three, you know, it is going, it's clubbed together when you do the assessment. Trochlear nerve, especially you can see the superior oblique muscles. So basically what happens, the patient cannot, loss of downward and inward movement is getting affected. And the conjugate gaze, if you see, you can see one eyeball is on the other side, the other eyeball will be on the other side. So like that you can see disconjugate gaze in the patients. So this is basically, because of this, what happens, the patient will have diplopia. The patient will not have vertical diplopia. That means two things they'll see. They'll not be able to identify. They'll not able to rotate the eye inferior laterally. How you do like this? No, that is not possible for the patients. The eye will be always deviates to upward and slightly inward. Like that, the eye will be deviated. It will not be. You cannot look downward and inward. So that is the thing happens in the trochlear nerve alone get lesions. And many conditions, isolated trochlear nerve lesions are very common. These kind of patients have difficulty in down walking downstairs. The causes will be head trauma, microvascular secondary to diabetes. You can get atherosclerosis, hypertension. Um, Other than head trauma, microvascular secondary to diabetes, atherosclerosis, hypertension, thyroid ophthalmopathy, myasthenia gravis, tumor, aneurysm, multiple sclerosis, all these cases, isolated trochlear nerve palsy is very common. That means it may not be along with the oculomotor or along with the abducent. Trochlear alone can get affected in these conditions. So when you treat any of these conditions, you have to check the trochlear nerve palsy. Head trauma, it can be accompanied with oculomotor abduction and many other nerves. But these other conditions, usually even after the cataract surgery, trochlear nerve palsy is very common. Abducent, if you see, again double vision you can see, because you can see the lateral rectus is getting affected. The patient will have double vision again, and usually it is due to the intracranial pressure is increased. Then you can see, I said you already, where is its placement. The ventricular pressure will be more, or if the fluid accumulation is more, it can compress this. So this, the patient will be having a squint, that is conjugate, disconjugate eye can be seen in this kind of patient also. And sometimes the nuclear lesion may also involve the facial nucleus, which is nearby the abduction, and facial always near the pontine and medullary junction. So that is why it is near the cerebellopontine angle. So if abducent affected, sometimes the facial also must have been affected. Um, Abducent testing, how will you do it? So usually what happens means, usually we should ask the patient. This abducent testing is not alone for abducent. Trochlear oculomotor will be able to test. You have to altogether you have to test it. Abducent testing, you can or trochlear or oculomotor, will ask the patient to stand in front of the patient, ask them to follow the finger. So with their eyes and to locate the site of diplomia. So when they move the fingers like this, uh, cross like this, they should indicate where they are getting the diplopia. So there we can say that that particular muscle is good. That means which movement of the eyes is affected. We can make out from where they are getting that diplopia. That is one thing that we can check also. You have to check the pupil sizes to find out if there is nystagmus. That is a very common feature. The nystagmus can be due to the vestibular region. The nystagmus can be due to the lesion in the oculomotor muscles also. So that you have to find out and verify whether you are getting a nystagmus on the side of lesion when you try to focus it. That you can do it. So one aspect is doing plus sign, that picture which I shown before. Then you can see where all eyeballs are moving upward, downward, medially, laterally, inward and outward. These things you have to check it out. Another thing, to find out the superior oblique, inferior oblique and all, we can make them to ask them to look at like a Z. We can draw the Z in front of them, ask them to look at that, track it and find out whether that movement is there or not. Okay, so this is about the oculomotor, I said, and trochlear, and I said about the abducent. In between, one nerve is there, that is the trigeminal nerve, which has got a different function. So it has got three division, as you know, sensory. It has got ophthalmic, maxillary, and mandibular divisions. So it carries the facial muscle, facial area sensitization, and it has got a motor component where it is supplying 8 muscles. Okay, so this is the supply. You can see three divisions. One aspect is this area, that is ophthalmic area. One aspect you can see maxillary area, and down you can see the mandibular area. These are the three branches we say for the trigeminal nerve. So this will take up three efferent systems. See, it is not just one sensation, it is three sensations. One is it sensitizes the proprioception of the face. Second one is the touch sensation can be sensitized by the trigeminal nerve. The pain and temperature sensation of the ophthalmic, mandibular and maxillary can be sensitized. So these all three sensations will be sensitized by the trigeminal nerve. When you see the muscles, you have got temporalis, masseter, medial, and arteriogoid. So other muscles are digastric, mylohyoid, tensor tympani, and tensor palatal, which is deep muscles. But the mastication muscles, we can easily check it up. So when you do the, when you see the lesions, ophthalmic is patient who have got superior orbital fissure syndrome will have the ophthalmic division affected, and the patient will have sensory loss. And it is usually with the oculomotor and trochlear nerve. When the patient's sensory of ophthalmic alone is affected, that means they might have involvement of the oculomotor and the trochlear nerve. If the lesion is at the maxillary division of the cranial nerve, usually the lesion is at the cavernous sinus. This results in again the loss of sensation at the maxillary area. And what happens along with that, you have abducent and you have oculomotor, and you can see trochlear involvement will be there. So isolated lesions are seen only at the maxillary fractures. If there is three all divisions are affected, mandibular is only affected in the case of if there is an there is a lesion at the mandibular region, or the tumor, or the removal of the glands, or the salivary glands, or the parotid gland. If sometimes the lesion can happen at the mandibular division, and patient will have loss of sensation at the mandibular division area. Sometimes we complete lesion may happens, and you can see there is a ipsilateral phase and weakness of the muscles of the mastication is the thing, and we can see the deviation to find out the pterygoids are getting affected. This is the thing usually you will do is we can use a broken wooden handle or cotton tip the applicator we can be used. Ask the patient to close the eyelids, and you should sensitize on the forehead, maxillary and mandibular division, and see that the patient is able to sensitize. Always do in closed eyes. Corneal reflex is one of the reflexes to be checked with the trigeminal nerve, that you all know. The patient should not be aware that you are going to touch the cornea. You should ask the patient, you should come near the patient, you can ask the patient to close the eyes and then you can do it, and you can see a blink on their eyes. So that is the best way to do it. Sometimes we can come from the back and do it. Sometimes it may give an agitation at the patient. So that also we have to be careful. Depends upon the patient. You should check that. That's the thing. So hope you all know about it. Wiping a cotton with the corneal area, and you can see the blink of the you can see the blink. That is called corneal blinking. Muscles of the mastication also, you know. How will you assess means you have to keep the lateral aspect of the forehead and ask the patient to clench his teeth. You can make out how much, when you clench the teeth, you can feel that muscle, that is temporalis. Sorry, that is what we have to check in temporalis. When you go for the masseter, you have to go again at the, ask the patient to close their jaw, and we have to make out at the mandibular region so that we will make out whether masseter is working or not. So we can ask the patient to move the jaw sideways to see that lateral pterygoid and medial pterygoid on the right side, and lateral pterygoid and the medial pterygoid on the left side. Lateral pterygoid, you should always think that the right aspects means right lateral pterygoid and left medial pterygoid. When you do on the left side, left lateral pterygoid and right medial pterygoid. So these are the two muscles we are checking for the pterygoid muscles. This also we have to, we can give the resistance with the hands. When you check the facial nerve, I think this everybody knows about it. It has got two things. One is about human, one is about the element. So if the right side facial nerve is affected, you say it is Bell's palsy. That means it is the one side. It can be, you know, the opposite side, the face is drawn towards the right side is the palsy, means it draws towards the right side. You can say eye closure is affected. We can see the palpebral fissure. This fissure is becoming more wide. This is normal. The other side will be more wide if it is affected. So how will you check it? You have to see the symmetry of the face. You have to check the wrinkles of the forehead. Okay, you have to check this frontal wrinkles also. Then you have to see the nasal fold. You have to check the wrinkle this eyebrows. This is wrinkling of eyebrows, and this is the wrinkling of the forehead. Both has to check. Deviation of the mouth you have to check. Ask the patient to smile and see that whether any difference. Puffing both sides you have to check it. I am rushing through, but I think I'm conveying the message to you. And you can see the division of facial nerves. When you say facial nerve, there are a lot of things. It's not Bell's palsy alone. If the patient is having a lesion at the facial nerve lesion is depends upon from where the facial nerve emerges, and you know in between it is giving two branches. So it depends where it is giving branch. One is branch to sensitize, one is the branch to taste. So it is depends upon which area is involved. You can see the features in the patients. So facial, if the lesion is the meatal or the canalicular segment, what happens? The patient will have hearing loss, plus the patient will have one side paralysis, and the patient will have added to the taste difference will be there. This indicates that the patient is having a lesion in the internal auditory canal. It may be due to the fracture of temporal bone or at the cerebellopontine angle because of the tumor in the cerebellopontine angle region. So you know vestibular schwannoma is the one of the commonest tumor which cause at the cerebellopontine angle area, and which compresses these two nerves, the abducen and facial. So in that cases, you can see the patient will have one side facial weakness plus tongue taste difference. If the patient is having lesion at the labyrinthine or the fallopian segment, the patient has spare in hearing. They can hear. That is hyperacusis. If you don't have hearing, then it is called as hyperacusis. They will have hearing, no issues with the hearing. But what happens? They'll have loss of taste sensation in the anterior two-thirds of the tongue, and loss of tearing. The lacrimation from the eyes is decreased, because the chordae tympani is the one which is involved, that is meant for the secretion of the fibers. Okay, so that is getting affected, so the tearing from the eyes is decreased, so that is not there, and the tongue sensation is affected, but hearing will be normal. Okay, that is one thing you have to be careful in different types of different areas of the involvement. And if you see lesion at the horizontal or tympanic segment, you can again see the nerve to stapedius is affected, and you can see result in hyperacusis. That means hearing loss will be there, taste difference is there, and you can see facial muscles. All three are involved. Taste is also affected, muscles are also involved. You can see tears from the eyes are also not there. So this is called again the lesion at the horizontal or tympanic segment. If the lesion is at the mastoid or vertical segment, loss of taste and facial paralysis occurs. If the lesion is beyond the chordae tympani in the vertical segment, you can see taste is paired. That is depends upon, you know, from the stylomastoid formant, just before that it is giving the branch. So if that depends upon where is the lesion happens at the mastoid level. So if it is paired, the taste sometimes the taste can be spared in the area of stylomastoid foramen region. So that is what usually this is the case usually come to us as facial paralysis. UMN is one of the facial palsy you can see, that is the term is facial palsy, and you know this event also. As, if you have a right CVA, if you have, for example, the right UMN CN7 dysfunction, that means the right side facial nerve involved because of the CVA, you can see the upper part of the face is spared out, because the crossed fibers and uncrossed fibers from the corticobulbar tracts is supplying both at the upper part of the face, but at the lower side you have only the same side fibers will be affected, and opposite fibers is not there to take care. So you can see, even though weakness are there on one side of the face, it is more visible at the lower face. So that's why we say lower part of the face is involved more. Actually speaking, one side of the face is affected, but the other fibers are there, no, the uncrossed fibers, that is taking care, so the visibility is not much. You can visibly only the lower part of the face, that's why it involves the lower half of the face. Vestibular cochlear nerve is one of the most important nerve for us. It has got two things. As you all know, it has got conductive or sensory. If there is a hearing loss, one is conductive hearing loss, one is sensory neural. How will you do it? We can do easily. We don't need to get the Weber's test and Rayner's test. If you get a patient, you just stand behind the patient, ask them to close the eyes, whisper a few words in one ear, ask them to repeat the same words. So if they are able to say a few words, it's well and good. And you should do on the other side also. Then again, what we can do is we can rub the hands like this and near the eyes and see, ask them whether they can hear it or not. And same other ears also you can do it and see. This is the easy way. When we go near the patient, we can do it, because Weber's test and Rayner's test may not be possible always when we go near the patient. You know, as we said, conductive and sensory neural, we have got two things. So as you all know, conductive phase means from the level of vestibular, where the cochlear division came, from there to the nuclear level. That is the hearing. You know, hearing is a sensory. Sensory means what? Your hairs in the ears has to sensitize hair receptors, has to sensitize, and it that receptors join together as nerve, come out as cochlear nerve, goes to the brainstem, and there is the nuclear. It has got one more division, that is vestibular division. So that is the hearing nerve. When it goes, that much area is called as conductive phase. But if from the nuclear level to the brain, to the other area, that means your temporal lobe is the one where you have to, if somebody calls me Annie, my name is Annie and I am hearing it as Annie and I perceive it as Annie because I understood it is Annie. I am not hearing as some other words. So that kind of perception is taking place in the temporal region. That is by the sensory neural division of the cochlear nerve. If that is affected, then it is, if it is affected, then it is called a sensory neural problem. You have this test, you all know about it, Weber's test, you know, one tuning fork, you have to keep it, and you have to keep at the edge of the palm, and you have to make a tone out of it, and you can, or you can just close it and open it, then also it start vibrating. That sound or that kind of vibration, if you keep on the patient's skull, okay, that is just at the middle of the skull, and you see that how far the patient can hear both sides. If they are able to hear both sides equally, then it is well and good. If there is one side, it is not less, and one side is less than the other side, it is called lateralizing to that side. That means that other side is affected. The vibrations are normally perceived equally in both ears because bone conduction is equal. In conductive hearing loss, the sound is louder in the abnormal there. So when you hear more, don't think that it is good. If the hearing loss is there, that means wherever the more sound, that it indicates that it is abnormal. And again, you have to find out how much the patient is able to hear it. So this is one thing you can do. So ask the patient to inform you when they can no longer appreciate the sound. So if the patient is not able to hear, then what you can do is you can move the turning fork such a way that it is placed right next to it, but not touching or the opening of ear. At this point, the patient should not be able to again hear the sound. So you can make out that is the reason why the bone conduction, air conduction difference comes, and you have to find out how much it is enabling them to hear it. So in conductive hearing loss, the patient does not continue to hear the sound since bone conduction in that case is better than the air conduction. That's why we do both at the vertex at the mastoid region. So, but in sensory neural hearing loss, both air conduction and bone conduction are decreased. So it is same. So conductive hearing loss we can make out by keeping both places, and we can see make out the differences. But in sensory neural loss, the hearing from this at the vertex at the bone, both will be same for the patients. I said sensory neural is basically at the central level. So when you see about the vestibular portion, it is enters the brainstem along with the cochlear portion. It is in the same place. Actually, what happens when you move the head or when you move the neck, the movements of the fluid which is present in the semicircular canal will be sensitized through the hair cells, and that is how the labyrinthine can sensitize that. Through that, it forms the vestibular nerve and goes to the central. So any fluid collection or any infection at the ear, sometimes the patient feels dizziness or imbalance. That is because of the fluid imbalance, or the sensitizing receptors has got some infectious disease. In these two conditions, the patient will feel dizziness and imbalance. Another one is Romberg test. You all know about it. Romberg test, two things you have to think of. One is you have to keep the patient to standing and close the eyes and see the sway in the patients. Close the legs together, closing the eyes, both are important. And if the patient can step forward and backward and see whether there is a sway. But in the case of, in the case of dorsal spinal column lesions or the cerebellar lesions, again you will get the Romberg sign positive. That indicates that if there is a vestibular lesion at the ears, you can see the patient will have towards that area, the patient will try to fall. Cerebellar or the dorsal column issues, you have to correlate with the other clinical features. So because cerebellar issues will have intention tremors and other things which is positive, this dysdiadochokinesis, all these things will be positive. So that you have to see. Then if the patient is having a dorsal spinal column disease, again you have to sensitize and see the sensory disturbances in the lower limbs and the proprioceptive differences. So that may be the reason why the Romberg test is positive. So always correlate whether it is the ear problem, or is it the dorsal spinal column issue, or is it the cerebellar issue. These three has to differentiate when you do the Romberg test for the vestibular patients. Glossopharyngeal nerve lesion is the again you have sensation that is posterior third of the tongue. You can see the patient has sensations, and again the palate and the pharyngeal walls is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. So if the patient is not functioning properly, then you can see there is a difference when you ask the patient to open the mouth, and you can see the uvula, that is the hanging one, whether it is pulled towards right or left. So that is why that is how we check the glossopharyngeal. But usually when you do the glossopharyngeal, the vagus will be joining with that. That's why we can see the gag reflex or the swallow reflex can be checked along with the vagus nerve. And vagus nerve has got a similar, I said it has got a sympathetic supply. So the carotid sinus, the ocular cardiac reflex, all these involved in the vagus. So that has to be checked. If the patient is a bradycardia and other clinical features, if it is related with the vagus, then you have to, the patient will have vagus issues also. The patient, one other feature is dysphagia, which can be due to the vagus nerve alone, and sometimes it can be due to the glossopharyngeal issues also. So how will you do it? That picture shows that autonomous nervous system, how it functions. The vagus has got autonomous nervous system functions, and how it regulate your other parts or other visceral organs, and how it is controlling. That is what the picture shows, because it vagus is not only supplying your palate or esophagus, it is having the other sympathetic supply to the organs like heart and other gastrointestinal systems. So that is why the picture says all organs. When you do the testing of glossopharyngeal and vagus, you can see soft palate elevation. That means asking the patient to open the mouth and say ah. When you say oh ah, what happens? You can see there is a uvula which is at the midline structure near the swallowing area, and that will be hanging down. So this, if the tongue obscures your view, take it. You can use the tongue depressor, put it down, and you can see. So if the uvula should rise up straight, if it is rising straight up, that indicates that it is normal. But if it is deviating to right or left, it indicates that the lesion is on the other side. So ask the patient to, when you do the gag reflex, same thing, the tongue depressor will be there and you will be touching the posterior part of the pharynx. So what happens, some patients will have that gag kind of thing. That is why it, anything which touches the posterior pharynx, you feel that gag sensation. So you will check on the right palate region, and as well as the left. Both sides you have to check. Sometimes the glossopharyngeal or the vagus will be affected only on one side. So you have to check the both sides and see. And also you can see sometimes the deviation when you touch it. So that is also one reason. So along with the gag, you can see the palate movement also can be seen. So that is why they say, take a cotton tipped applicant and gently brush it against the posterior pharynx or uvula. This should generate a gag in most patients. Okay, a small but measurable percentage of normal population has either a minimal or non-existent gag reflex. And sometimes everybody will not have the same kind of gag. Sometimes they'll have minimal and it will be controlled way. So the gag reflex, that is, or the palatal reflex, has to see with the deviation of the palate. That is what I said. The palate usually elevate, and you can see if it is uvula should be straight up. If the uvula is going towards the right side or left side, that indicates the paralysis of the 9th and 10th. So the palate is deviating only towards the one side, and you can see contraction of or the movement of uvula and palate towards the one side. That indicates the other side is paralyzed. So that is very common. So if the patient has got vagal, and if they have recurrent laryngeal nerve comes, if it is get affected, you can see the sound is changed. When you get a cold or cough and all, how is the sound? That hoarseness of the voice is very common if the patient has got a vagal nerve lesion. If the patient, next one is spinal accessory nerve, basically two muscles, trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. You know why it is, because this nucleus ambiguous of the spinal accessory nerve joins with the vagus nerve. So that is how it forms the recurrent laryngeal. That has to be very careful. So this vagus, glossopharyngeal, spinal accessory all goes together. So spinal accessory comes because it has got all the 5-6 segments of the cervical segments also is giving branch to the spinal accessory. That is why the term called as spinal accessory, because it is joining together and going towards the foramen magnum. So that is why, and it exists through the jugular foramen. So that is why it is called as spinal accessory nerves. And as usual, the two muscles are supplying to that. So, asking the patient to hold the hand on the shoulder, ask them to shrug it against the resistance. So, if there is unusual weakness, we can make out the muscle is affected. So, this repeat on the both side for the trapezius and sternomastoid, how is it? You have to, towards the side, you have to one side rotation and flexion, you have to do it and find out whether which side is more effective, whether it is right or left. If the patient is having pain or trapeziitis, it may not be a spinal accessory nerve injury. It may be a pure nerve, pure muscular injuries. That has to differentiate it. That we can check it by the muscle contraction. If the patient is able to contract the muscles, and if there is a pain, then surely it may not be due to the thing. If the patient is having any associated diseases along with this, like brain or spinal cord diseases, then you have to check of spinal accessory nerve involvement, which is due to the lesion. Okay, so suppose it is mainly in the case of higher cervical cord injuries. Hypoglossal nerve, as usual, it provides motor innervation for all the extensive of tongue muscles. So you ask the patient to protrude the tongue and see that whether it is deviated to which side. So usually it is deviated to the affected side. That is what it is more important. It is because of the other muscles which is taking care. So that is why you can see the tongue deviation, and tongue deviation is seeing whether, or you can a tip of the tongue where it is deviated. That is the indication of the involvement of cranial nerve 12. So that is what that is. I think that is the easiest nerve to check in the cranial nerves. When I go for the neuro lesions, I'm giving a very a glimpse about it. So the main bulbar palsy happens in the cranial nerve 9, 10, 11, and 12. The bulbar palsy means this is involved in the cases higher spinal cord injuries or in the GBS if it is ascending up. Any spinal cord injuries, not any spinal cord diseases, if it is ascending up, if it involves the brainstem, these four nerves is mainly involved. So whenever we treat any brain lesions or GBS conditions, we have to check all these four nerves. So sometimes it occurs as a lower motor neuron lesion at the nuclear level, at the medulla oblongata, okay, or at the lower cranial levels. So we have to differentiate whether it is. Sometimes the patient may be having a dysarthria where they cannot swallow, they cannot eat properly. Okay, they may not be able to swallow properly. These are the issues usually they will say, and they cannot talk properly. It may not be due to a brain issues like a Broca's injury or Broca's areas involvement or Wernicke's areas involvement. It may be purely the peripheral region, that is the glossopharyngeal and vagus issues. So that we have to differentiate, and that is also very common in the case of brain injuries, brain conditions like stroke, or in the GBS or multiple sclerosis, these conditions. So these conditions, please check 9, 10, 11, and 12. That is very important. What is the symptoms of these nerves if it is involved? Means the patient will have dysphagia, they will have difficulty in swallowing, okay, and dysphonia, that means there will be defectness in the voice. Dysarthria, they will not be able to talk in articulating the words. It is not Broca's. Broca's means they cannot plan and talk properly. Articulation is different. Articulation means they cannot talk. In Parkinsonism also you can say dysarthria. So it is a feature of Parkinson's causing bradykinesia and the patient is not able to speak. But in other conditions also we have to clearly make out this nerve, this thing. Dysphasia, there is difficulty in using understanding words due to injury or disease of the brain. This also can be due to, we can differentiate whether the nerve involvement is there or not. Difficulty in chewing, nasal regurgitation, that is very thing, a slurring of chips, choking or in on liquids. So these are the common things. That means, whatever you have, it is coming through the nasal regurgitation. You can have speech difficulties, and you have liquid, you will choke it. So that is the common symptoms usually see in the case of these four nerve lesions in the neural aspect. Signs: nasal speech lacking in modulation, difficulty with all consonants. Tongue is atrophy. You have to make out. Hypoglossal nerves means you can see the tongue atrophy is very common. Fasciculations of the hypoglossal is very common if it is injured. Dribbling of saliva means there is articulation is involved and you have dribbling of saliva. You can see palate is weakened, asking the patient to say ha, talking is difficult. The jaw jerk is normal, sometimes it will be absent. The gag reflex may be absent. So these all things, it shows that the patient is having a lower motor neuron lesion of all these four nerves. So there is another thing which is called as pseudobulbar palsy. This is due to the lesion at the 9 and 12th nerve. So in these cases, what happens? This is basically due to the corticobulbar tracts in the midpoints. This is usually seen in the case of stroke cases. And what same features you can see. Basically, what happens means if there is an infection, okay, or if there is a motor neuron disease or syringobulbia, if there is a GBS, poliomyelitis, Lyme disease, brainstem glioma, botulism, myasthenia gravis, all these features will show. This is not a pure lobar motor neuron lesion. It is the pseudobulbar palsy. That is basically the corticobulbar tracts, and the involvement of the cortical area is the main reason for this condition. And this is, you always think that pseudobulbar palsy means it's the upper motor neuron lesion. So it is something to do with the corticobulbar tracts that has to be taken care. So when you treat that kind of conditions, you have to treat how you manage the stroke, same way you have to think. That means the lower motor part of the nerve is completely good. You have to facilitate, you have to give oropharyngeal training, that kind of things for the patient to come back to the normal. It is recovering thing for the patients. They'll have again same features, dysphagia, they'll have difficulty in chewing, dysarthria, they have slurred speech, everything. All features what you see in bulbar palsy, same thing can be seen in pseudobulbar palsy. The difference is pseudobulbar palsy we can clearly make out because it is associated with some other conditions, and it is recoverable. We can recover, or we can make an easy recover. We can treat that condition and you can see the recovery in patients. So this I'm not going to repeat. So these are the main conditions you can see, multiple sclerosis, all things you can see in these things. One feature which I want to say in cranial nervous system is the Horner syndrome, which is very common. This is the disruption of the sympathetic supply to the head and neck. So please be a thing. And this is usually associated with the Pancoast tumor, which is seen in the lung conditions. So Horner syndrome is not the pure lower motor neuron lesion or pure upper motor neuron lesion. It is something to do with the sympathetic nervous system. And if the lesion happens, so that you have to give the time for the patient to recover it. That is the best way to do it. So on the side of the lesion, you can make out there is a drooping of the eyelid. You can see constricted pupil, bloodshot eye, warm red skin, and dry face, because all the nerves are getting involved. These are the 5 points you have to remember for the any cranial nerve management. One is about the eye muscle management. Eye muscle management is not about purely about the oculomotor nerve palsy. Eye management is basically for the strengthening of the even the vision. If the eye muscles are weak, even the vision get affected. So you have to give eye muscle strengthening for the patients if they have a vision issues, if they're using the glass, or if they have pure upper motor neuron lesions. These 3 conditions, you have to give the eye muscle training for the patients, and it has to be routinely done every 1 hour. That is the study says. They have to routinely do for the eye, for this thing, because the eye muscles which go for weakening can cause decreased vision in the patients. So eye muscle training is important, and it has to be trained for 3 nerves together. That is oculomotor, trochlear, and abducen has to be done. All the movements has to be done properly. Facial muscle management is purely for the facial muscles, either for the upper motor neuron lesion as well as for the lower motor neuron lesions. When you say about the facial muscles, it is important for the patients, not only for the facial nerve involvement, it sometimes may be due to the glossopharyngeal, hypoglossal vagus nerve involvement also. You have to do facial muscles training for the patient to do talk properly, eat properly. So we cannot train glossopharyngeal and the hypoglossal and vagus alone. So we have to be together with the facial muscle. The facial muscle training also is important. All the movements has to be done. It is important for even for the respiratory training, so that it will improve the endurance in the patient. So this will make utilize for the patients not only in neurological area, you can use for the cardiorespiratory conditions also. Oropharyngeal therapy is very important for the upper motor neuron lesion as well as for the lower motor neuron lesions. So that you have to give facilitation things and inhibition things. Sometimes the gag reflex will be more. What you will do? You have to give to see that you have to apply the pressure, you have to give the inhibition modalities. You cannot give facilitation for the, or you cannot continuously do the same kind of things. Suppose if you are giving a hot water, sometimes if you're drinking the first sip, increases the gag reflex in the patient. So the patient has to be in the modest of a sip drink. That will be the first thing maybe you have to teach the patient. Then later on with a glass. It is not the first drink or first using with a mug or glass jar for drinking water. So that is also important for the oropharyngeal therapy. So when I say these things, it is important for the oral musculature to be trained inside as well as to the palate area. So this is important, and it will be go together with the facial muscles, glossopharyngeal, vagus, and the hypoglossal nerve. So that is very important. Trigeminal pain is the very common thing you can see, and hemifacial spasms also can be seen along with the trigeminal neuralgia cases. The condition we have to take it out, otherwise the patient pain will not subside usually. But if the patient is in the initial stages, not only giving TENS is the indication for the trigeminal neuralgia, we have to give a facial relaxation position for the patients, because they will get a frequent episodes of pain. So the frequency increases, that indicates that trigeminal compression is more, they have to go for decompression surgery. Other than that, if you do 100 physiotherapy also, the patient will not recover because the causative factor is not removed, so the pain will not subside. But if in the case of patient is in a condition where they cannot go for a surgery, if the condition is so worst, in that condition we can just teach relaxation exercise to the patient. That's all we can do it. TENS is a placebo, is used as a placebo effect for the patient. It is not giving a correct thing. Otherwise we can give a facial stimulation, that is also good enough, but that should be consistent. It should not be like a facilitation. Muscle training include not only the facial muscles, the upper neck muscle has to be strengthened for the cranial nerve pulses. When you train the eye muscles, we have to take care of the neck muscles and the neck and around muscles. So your spinal accessory and trapezius is very much important. Another one thing which is very important, which is not mentioned here in the case of pain, is suboccipital muscle release is a very good technique which we can reduce the pain of occipital headache, and also will give good effect. So we can apply a sort of C1, C2, C3 manipulations which release the pain for the patient in the neck region, and the correct technique and the interlocking mechanism has to be redo for the patients. This will help the muscle activation of the neck muscles properly and reduces the pain in the patient. So you should not look into the cranial nerve as a neurological area alone. It has to be in the thing of cardiorespiratory. It has to be taken care in the case of musculoskeletal. It is not a pure neuro thing. So sometimes the patients, the pain in the patient may not be able to sensitize. Is it a trigeminal pain, or is it a migraine pain, or is it an occipital pain? Sometimes the release of the neck muscles or the correct activation of the C2, 3 to C4. C2 to C4 is very important for the mobility. So if you do a correct pattern of mobility of these three joints for the side movements as well as anterior posterior correct mobility, then definitely the patient's pain will subside and can improve. I think that completes a glimpse of cranial nerve assessment and management. I know it's a broad topic. Hope I have conveyed the correct message. If you have any doubts, you can ask to me.
Yes, madam. It was a fruitful session for us. Uh,
The
it was
students
a
just,
very lengthy topic. You handled it in a very easy way.
yeah.
Many of the participants were asking for a PPT,
You can
and
share, sir, no
that
issues.
means yes, madam. Yes, madam. Let us
See,
go for
that's what,
those.
because that's why I put up a little more words into that so that when they read up, they'll understand more about it. Not for
Yes,
taking classes. Class I can speak, but if they wanted to read it again, the points will be there. That's why. Otherwise, PPT should not have this many words in few things.
yes, madam. There was question from interrupted session. Okay, first 40
Ah,
minutes from
okay.
Smriti Patki. Please
It is that.
explain homonymous hemianopia.
Homonymous and see, I said you that day at that time itself. You have. Do you want to see the PPT? Means I will show you. When there is a lesion at the optic nerve alone, it is gone. That means that one aspect is not. When you say homonymous anopia, the nerve comes beyond that. That means it has come to the tract level. So when there is a lesion happens at that level, what will happen to it? That means your nasal half and the temporal half is getting affected. So that picture was clearly indicated. That's why I told you should see that picture properly. I'll show you.
Yes, madam. Show it, madam.
Yeah. See, can you see this? Um, you have got homonymous hemianopia. You can see that part, fourth point. You can see uh, the temporal half plus nasal half. Both it is affected. In fourth point, you see the right side is the lesion. Optic nerve is good. Okay, there was no lesion. The optic chiasma was good. But when you come to the optic tract lesion, there is a lesion at that area. So it has got both the fibers from the right and left eye. The both the fibers was from where? It was from the right nasal region and the left temporal region. So if the right nasal and left temporal region field is come to the that area and that is affected means the patient cannot see that two field area. That comes as homonymous hemianopia. That is the example for what I said in this picture. I think it's more clear. With
They
the
can
picture,
click the
periodically you
screenshot.
can understand. Yeah.
Yes.
It is there in all textbooks actually, this picture if you take, see.
Yes, yes, madam.
This
Then
chat box, should
question.
I see? Then I think questions are there in chat
No,
box.
madam. This was interrupted sessions questions. I wrote it down. That's why. From
Okay.
Isha, can you again differentiate between the three conditions in cranial nerve 8 lesions with balance?
See, you have got, that's what I said, cranial nerve lesion with the vestibular region alone. You have got, you must have heard of the word called as vertigo. Okay, at the unilateral side, you have bilateral side vertigo. These all issues are coming purely with the vestibular issues. It is with the ear canal issues. The patient is getting the balance. It is not along, it's not the lesion with the dorsal column or it is not the lesion with the cerebellum. That's why I told you it's always differentiate with the clinical features of the dorsal column and the cerebellum when you see a patient having loss in balance. If the patient is having only vest, and you should not give the rehabilitation same as you give for the patients in a vestibular rehabilitation. This is different. You have to check, and again one more point is you can check the nystagmus for the patient if there is oculomotor lesion is there. If the nystagmus is due to the cerebellar lesion, then the case is different. It is not a vestibular issue. So you have to see the vestibular nerve to the stem is problem or from the vestibular nerve to the cerebellum is the issue. If the vestibular nerve to the lesion to the cerebellum or the cerebellar is the problem is thing, that become a central vestibular issue. It is not a peripheral vestibular issue. The peripheral vestibular issues is always with the involvement of the ear or the ear canal. That is the peripheral vestibular issues. The patient will have lesion and the movements swaying or the balance difficulty only towards that side of the lesion. they will have difficulty when they get up or when they move. They have loss of balance on that side. That's why I said Romberg side, we cannot say it is a complete indicator for the vestibular dysfunction because it indicates problem for the dorsal spinal column issues and cerebellum. So that differentiation we have to do for the vestibular disease, because you can see Meniere's disease, so many diseases are there when there is a vestibular issues. Vestibular rehabilitation itself is a big topic, but peripheral vestibular is different. That we have to clearly check it out.
Thank you all the participants. Thank you very much, madam. It was a
Thank you, ma'am.
lengthy session, but it was very much informative.